hung out with the girls. Always hung out with the girls. Always hung out with the girls. The girls, they accepted me.
Hi, this is Ozma In The Dark here for, the Fluid Voice. I am still utilizing she, they pronouns with my green black clover, anime TV shirt with, posters in the background. I am here with Perfict. How are you doing?
I am doing well, he, him pronouns, and I am sporting a lovely drawing.
Yes.
Attired all in blue feathers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and a yellow nose. And pink eyelets. And we are here. Christy has been feeling under the weather a lot. If Christy shows up, we will bring her in stream. If not, anything. If she needs more sleep or any amount of self-care, good. I want her to end up not pushing herself too much and feel better. And we are here with M. How are you doing?
I am fine. I am currently represented by two pictures of one of the best dogs I've ever known, who was a large black hound dog with white patches. And for specificity's sake, birds don't have noses, they have beaks, so Perfict's beak is yellow.
Okay, I mean, fair. I mean, being technically correct is, as usual, the best form of correct. And we are here today to talk about universal design in social spaces. Now, M, you came up with this idea. You came up with the idea of universal design. You're getting credited with that now. You pitched the idea to me a while ago to use on the show, and
yeah, it's kind of appropriate for Pride Month specifically because there are a fair amount of intersections in the queer and disabled communities, and disabled people do not always feel as welcome or as accommodated or included in queer spaces as they otherwise could. As we have discussed previously, bathrooms can be an issue, and that as a disabled person who relies heavily on the very inconspicuous mobility devices, is particularly frustrating from some queer or pride related events, because it's like I argue about bathrooms all the time in my daily life. Some of you may be new to this, but if I come to you and say, I would like to participate in your event, please, and I would also like to be able to use a restroom safely, to be met with pushback is sometimes frustrating. So that's kind of where some of it starts, but it's not limited to that. Things like having access to beverages or events that are not simply centered around alcohol for those who cannot or do not partake for whatever reasons, and not for that to be a reason for increased social stigma, or things like high top tables, which are a great trend in restaurant design at this point, are something of my nightmares. It makes socializing and moving about a room, really problematic. And also, if I am drinking any form of beverage or trying to ingest any form of food, I don't like it to be at the level of my nose.
Yeah, that I could see the rub there.
So it's just in my experience about being more open to and more responsive to needs that you possibly hadn't thought of or hadn't been considered just because they hadn't been mentioned before. But yeah.
Yeah, and um uh uh yes, I mean that is one aspect of the importance of universal design, but obviously it's important not to leave people out of social setting.
Yeah, the only thing I can offer in the forgiveness category is I've talked with people who are setting up prides, and one of the things that they have often talked about was fighting over ordinances concerning bathrooms and having to have enough porta potties. But not only that, they had to sue to have access to the public toilets which were nearby, because they can't be without the public toilets, and so on. And that they just, I could see where over such an issue they felt they were just out of spoons, and they were fighting so many fronts on so many things that this was where they were going to be meeting with minimum requirements. They were and viewing them as bathrooms that they had to have through ordinances, but were never going to really be used because everyone would just use the porta potties. And I know that's not the case, but they weren't being bad people, is what I'm trying to say. Probably in that instance, they were just being lazy.
I would hope, and I would recommend to anybody setting up future events that perhaps those opportunities could be used for outreach to other organizations that perhaps involve disabled people or people with other medical needs, and make it more of a group effort so that one group doesn't feel that level of burnout as much.
That's what I'm saying, is they could come in with some spoons.
Right. They could come in with some spoons. They could come in with some other resources about knowing how to plan for an event differently. They could energy and other resources and other perspectives could be a value that have yet been untapped. So, maybe that's something to look forward to more in the future.
Well, I think once again, I know Bo of the Fifth Column did a video on this when it comes to organizing, and usually it's like it's generally, you can generally do it effectively with at least 8 to 12 people, or around 8 to 12 people. Though I don't know, that might be a general estimate for non-disabled people. For disabled people, it might be 15 to 20 might be better. I don't know, but like you generally need to work together. People need to work together to get anything done consistently. Otherwise you will get burned out.
Right, and that is a legitimate disability-related concern. Disabled people frequently have to deal with burnout for various things. So that's a form of access and accommodation mitigation as well, and we need to give that due time and effectiveness too.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, even non-disabled people experience burnout. as the League of Legends fangirl that I am, I'm told that you shouldn't play more than 2 hours without taking a break, and just so that you to end frustration, so you don't get burned out practicing, because you can only do so much. Your brain can only do so much, and then you're not really learning. You're just making the same mistake over and over again, but worse.
Oh yeah, yes, that's a thing. But
but yeah, in terms of universal design, one of the examples, well, first off, actually, I think one of the important things for understanding the value of universal design is to understand a little bit about the social model of disability. Now, my favorite way to describe it is if everyone was deaf, there'd be no need to dampen noise. If everyone was deaf in such a way that whatever noise was created is not going to bother most people, then if you are non-disabled or whatnot, and at least if you happen to not be deaf, you would be the outlier, and everything would be everything in the way society is made would be working against you. I've also heard a few other examples. I think Rico Rants came up with one when I was talking with him on stream once about like if people had like Michael Phelps type stuff where they don't experience the muscle fatigue and like all this other physiological stuff, that and then you wouldn't be able to work as much, or like even if most people only need to sleep 2 hours a day and you had to sleep 8 hours a day, you wouldn't be able, people would be like wondering why you have a tough time doing 12-hour shifts, like all sorts of stuff like this. And that's part of the reason why universal design is helpful, because other people have different needs and different things that if you just change one thing, everyone can be more open in society.
Right. The crux of universal design is really about mitigating barriers as much as possible based on resources, and then resources then can be used more effectively by everyone, even for something as relatively simple as curb cuts. Curb cuts are not only used by people in wheelchairs. When was the last time you pushed a grocery cart or a shopping cart and didn't use a curb cut to get back up on to the store or whatever? Probably not, that it never happens, but at this point, it's relatively uncommon.
Biking as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I know you're not supposed to bike on the sidewalk a lot of times, but I mean, when people bike or skateboarders or is any number of wheel-based thing, everyone is going to go for the curb cut.
Right, or at least the vast majority of people. Some people hurry or with a light load or whatever aren't going to care. They're just going to pop over and make that not a big deal, because at that point time is more a value to them than the energy expenditure, and that's fine. But having that option greatly affects the options for everyone, as opposed to not having the option and not having the possibility open to other people.
I think that with Pride Month and such going on, that and this is possibly a bit late in the game for any planning stage stuff, but that the LGBTQ community is very aware of using resource denial as a method of controlling people and controlling access. And resource like bathrooms, just blatantly, things like that. And that I think that perhaps being approached might be, the proactive on the side, and I'm not trying to say it's put off on them, but sometimes you got to stand up for yourself, and saying to them, do you need a person who knows about handicap needs to help with your planning committees? Because, not because there are handicapped people who might like to come and visit your pride, there are LGBTQ people who are handicapped. And, these are really the people you want to be reaching too. These are not just visitors.
Right. And that points to a larger issue as well, where it's disabled people can be seen as less desirable by default, just in general, either for optics or for possible partnership or entertainment purposes. So I think we do have to be honest and reckon with the idea that that is also an issue that fits across society, but also in queer settings as well, where it's like, okay, no, there are disabled people who are also queer, because intersectionality is a thing. Yeah. And that's you more than one thing can be true at a time. So it's not just for the tourism and not all, but many adult disabled people want to pursue adult relationships of all different forms, and that should be as open as possible. And to sort of forget that or negate that is really unfair. In the same way that even though there's pushback, if you were just to say that ace people just shouldn't be at Pride at all, is no, that's not the point. Literally, they get a letter, and I realize that not all parts of Pride activities would be set up as ideal for ace people, but just say, ew, no, well, we just don't want ace people there because that's just not our target audience. That's literally not the point. So I just think people need to broaden their horizons and really presume confidence, and presume, when presented, an actual authentic desire of people to participate at whatever level is effective for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And motivation in general can be an issue, and hierarchies are an issue, and the thing is, if you've experienced something bad, that doesn't mean you haven't undid all the conditioning that went on in your brain to every other marginalized group's experience. Even if you should know things, or it makes sense to make that connection, they're not necessarily obvious unless you have the words for it. And and it's a lot easier to get the words for it if you make stuff more accessible to the general population. And by general population, I mean everybody, or as many people as possible.
Right. Because diversity is a strength in whatever form you encounter it.
Yeah. Now, you probably know a lot more about universal design than I do. So I'm interested in finding out more about not just in Pride things, but do you know anything about what would be in restaurants and things like that to make it actually more accessible for people? What would be required in the universal design there? What's needed, and what's needed for, once again,
Okay.
bathrooms?
So just in general, I'm sorry, beyond bathrooms or
Well,
yeah, okay.
bathrooms, I got a really good general idea of what's
Okay,
needed
cool.
in bathrooms.
Got it. So generally,
We did. Oh, sorry to interrupt. We did an episode on bathrooms in the past, and there's a whole long conversation about bathrooms before. So we do have a good concept of bathrooms. If you don't, feel free to. Oh, I don't remember the name of the episode, but feel free to watch more of my show and
research the whole library. You'll find it sometime. There we go.
yeah, we can provide links in the description because
I should do that.
Yeah.
We can do that, or you can do that. Somebody can do that.
I was trying to trick them into watching the whole library.
Yeah, they need to watch all the show, and also the wonderful shorter episode, the clip that was like 5 minutes long from that episode that I was really proud of. Anyway, sorry.
It's really awesome. So as an example, to generally make, say, restaurants more accessible, because that was where so it's to provide a variety of seating options, so not all at one height, and to provide seating options which allow chairs or seating arrangements to be removed fully from the table. So not just to have high top seating and not just to have booth style seating, so that if somebody has a mobility need of any sort, that can be sort of naturally accommodated to. I don't know what the actual measurements are off the top of my head, but basically to provide clear walking paths for both patrons and servers, to have plenty of room to navigate the restaurant or the space, especially for servers too. It's a safety issue because if you're carrying large trays and platters of food, you don't really want to be bumped into when you're holding large amounts of hot stuff on breakable plates. That's a safety hazard.
Yeah, like waffles.
Right. The more that can be, mitigated for everyone, increases safety and comfort across the board. That also applies to, say, general shopping areas, making sure that aisles meet general complete width criteria. So there's an easy way either for more than one person to navigate past each other, or in the absence of that, an easy way, if it is only single aisle, for somebody to get from one area to the next without basically crashing into someone else. So
And the aisle width thing should be measured without taking into account the big steel poles that's running up the middle of it.
Correct. The large steel poles, the fantastical in cap displays that encroach into the aisle spaces, retailers are wont to do. But maintaining a clear path, again, for employees as well as patrons. Generally speaking, that's general. The theory is in the kinds of retail based spaces for this part of the conversation, to just keep things as open as possible and to design things with like at least two people at a time, if not like the equivalent of like a cart to maneuver stuff through simultaneously, so that design is more open. And in terms of universal design for public spaces, to include ramps and to make it so that stairs are not the only way to access necessary aspects or public aspects of a building. Those being the major physical tenets of universal design. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I will say also handful of other things that were on my brain. Not to have constant blaring noise, like the loud music sort of thing in stores and restaurants. Some stores, they do this where it's just like, I don't know how they have the music. They have the music like it's very aggressive. Maybe that might have been more so in the 90s, to be fair. I've avoided shopping malls since then, but like, you know what I mean? Like that stuff to the number thing. I mean, there's some stuff that's used but not used all the time, because like people are not if your name is called being the only way to identify if you've gotten something is not necessarily the best, because you don't know the what sorts of what exactly the person's hearing is like, or whatnot, or I'm trying to think. I think there's some other stuff, but yeah, ramps, door width. That's another one.
Yeah.
I mean, that's related to ramps, but I know door width needs to be like a certain width. I mean, the ADA has a ton of requirements that are not enforced with the general public. So
yeah. Right. Sensory issues are definitely an overlooked consideration. And for a long time, venues would do this thing where, like, for whatever reason, the music would be extra loud in the bathrooms. So if you went into the bathroom to try and like get a break and like, you know, wash your face and have a breather, it's not super helpful to go into a bathroom where like they're blaring like loud, let's keep the momentum going type music. So, you know, you don't know if hearing is an issue. Also, you don't know what the processing or overload speed of somebody is, if there's distraction or chaos or whatever else going on. So yes, employing multiple systems for someone to be able to get whatever it is they're frequenting your event or establishment in order to get is always a good policy. It's always good to have backups. And just to be open to the idea that if somebody comes to you with other needs or other concerns, that it's an opportunity to make things easier for everyone. In the non-physical sense, closed captions are a great example of that. There are a lot of people who, when they're trying to parse information, even if their hearing is not an issue at all, will have closed captions on to expedite or simplify their processing of information, or they may just be in another venue where it would not be conducive to them to experience the audio at that time, but they still need the information. So closed captioning can be a great option for everyone.
I will say, because closed captioning is brought up, I have not yet figured out what's the best way to solve the YouTube closed captioning related issue. I know there's a closed captioning thing on my Twitch streams, which I have up. Try to do that, but
Oh,
yeah,
the Google
that-
auto captcha thing for automatically closed captions YouTube stuff. They've got a bot that does it. Is that what you're talking about?
They've
Well-
got a bot that'll do it, but the bots don't do it live anymore. YouTube's been really
Yeah.
weird about that.
yeah, and that's I don't want to dissuade live viewers, and like I said, it's not like it's a complicated thing. For some, I don't understand why YouTube isn't doing it that way, considering I have a mod on Twitch that should be doing it. I suppose I haven't actually tested it. Have you tested the closed caption thing on my Twitch ever?
On Twitch, it seems to work okay.
Okay.
YouTube will do it, and YouTube will do the auto captioning, but YouTube is for some reason still bad at doing it live. And I don't fortunately have a good solution
Okay.
for that. So,
Yeah.
like, if you come back to watch the replay, there will be captions, and if you have issues with some of the captions, we can try and rectify that like after the fact. But unfortunately, there's not a great way to address
Yeah.
that.
Well, I mean, I don't even know how I could go through the effort, because everything is a way to, it is a potential thing for overwhelming myself, and I don't want to want
No.
to put too much on my plate, nor do I want to promise more than I can do. But like, yeah, I was just, because you brought up closed captions, and it's something that's on my mind with stuff. And as for Twitch, that's a mod I have on Twitch. Twitch doesn't do that by default.
Right. YouTube's really bad at that right now, and I don't know a good solution for that. And I've mentioned
Yeah.
it to some people in various positions who should know way better than me, and they haven't offered a great solution for captioning YouTube lives either. When I figure it out, I'll be sure to like yell really loud and let everyone I know. But yeah. I think there's great opportunity in intersectional communities at this point, leading with queer ones, for really outreach and helping each other. And I think we all just need to do our best to do what we can to make things better. And sometimes it's as simple as, okay, I can't make sure the captions are done live, but we can double check and make sure they're up after the fact. And sometimes we just have to do the best we can with what we have. And that's perfectly valid.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things, back to well, I mean, that closed caption is a part of universal design, because there's a lot of reasons people use the closed caption, and who a lot of reasons people listen to audiobooks. There's a lot of reasons for a lot of things, but in terms of universal design, the interesting thing is just one of the benefits for people for working together is oftentimes you can tackle some of the same stuff, and there's just a lot of overlap. Like if like discrimination stuff that was civil rights movements have helped every marginalized group to some degree, even if it's a small degree, in terms of framework, in terms of a lot of stuff. I don't know you guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think a rising tide definitely lifts all boats, and that should be a goal. That's a feature, not a bug. So
Why do I keep seeing that everywhere?
That's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
that's a like a relatively semi-old internet like coder thing.
Oh.
And it's come up recently for something. I don't know exactly why, but yeah.
I mean, I've heard. I think I've heard it used when there are laws set up to discriminate against people where no, the discrimination is the feature, not a bug.
Yeah, well, that's being sarcastic about it, because a lot of times there were things where people were saying there's a problem with the program. If I leave it alone for half an hour, it shuts off. And usually response was, that's not a flaw, that's a feature. It's supposed to do that. If you leave it on, it shuts itself off.
Yeah.
Yeah, to save resources or whatever else.
Yeah, you're not using it, it shuts off. And they designed it that way. And my attitude on those things are always, couldn't you put in a button? Just a toggle where it's yes, no, I have it doing that, I have it, don't have it doing that.
I mean, you could go into settings.
Yeah, a settings thing on your program. In the why isn't that one of the numerous things that I can change if I go into the guts of your program, or that you've provided me with a access to the guts later with a drop down menu? I mean, things have gotten really easy, but
And that's an excellent point as far as accessibility goes, because a lot of the features that are started, especially on mobile operating systems, before they like wide launch a feature, they'll put it in accessibility first. So whether that's universal captioning, whether that's reduce your white point on your device, whether that's my brain is not helping me with it. Reduced white point. There was being able to use other forms of pointing devices. Those things. Those are like basically soft launched as accessibility features to sort of get them effectively beta tested first, and then people find different ways to use them or implementations for them, or they get the bugs out kind of as a less used, we're going to do this as a thing, but we're not going to fully publicize it under the auspices of accessibility. And then the public goes, but I want captions everywhere. But if I reduce the white point on my device, then I'm saving some battery or other things like that. And there's another big one that's like right in my head and I can't quite, I don't know what I'm thinking. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely see aspects of that, and there's a lot of things that could be used. Um, like oh my god, I apologize to the audience for how much my brain goes towards League of Legends, but in League of Legends there is colorblind option for colors, and some people have an easier time with the game with that option. Some people who do not happen to be colorblind, or if they are colorblind, they're very minorly so, use that option because it makes it easier for them in the game. To just process stuff.
And that's a great
Okay.
example of this mitigation, which is really the kernel of the point of universal design. It's like, okay, well, it's designed for color blindness, but it's applied more widely just because for some people, whether or not this is the actual issue they have, it just makes it easier for processing. So therefore, have at it, everybody.
Yeah, and I mean that's happened in a lot of other games. I've heard about various features, um, in other games, just making it more enjoyable for the general populace, because not everyone sees things the same way. Um, uh, um, I mean, frame rate technically is another thing. So not everyone. I know I made like a not the best gamer comment in the pre-record that's coming out in a week. A joke about seeing stuff only in 30 FPS or whatnot. People do genuinely. Some people only see up to 30 FPS. It's like a percentage of the population. Or it might not be 30 FPS specifically, but like around that area. So they're not going to see a difference between 30 and 60 FPS. And even less people see. At some point, it's a minority of the population that notices frame rate differences. Like, and that's not a good or a bad thing, but being able to do a set frame rate is with relation to accessibility. If you're not going to notice the difference, and it's a lot easier for you to play the game. Like, there's tons of display options in video games that you can mess with, which genuinely help with the accessibility, with having worse computers and there not being a difference, or any number of issues. And that's also helpful for everyone. But so how do you how do, because I think we agree on uh more I can't words. The name of the episode, the topic suggested for the episode, universal design. I think we agree on universal design, but how exactly what can be done to try to promote it? I guess, for lack of a better word, because I there are things. It's easy to want to change the world, and but like people can only do so much on their own. So
Yeah, really, I think that this is one where it's primarily going to be worked through legislation. I mean, there's a modest amount that happens on the social end, but really this is about getting legislation which says that you gotta, if you want to run a restaurant, you have to do these things. You know, if you, and that making those dependent on the businesses, and it's a lot easier to impose such things on civics buildings and town halls and courthouses, where you go, I have to have access to the law. And that people understand that as being a necessity, but they go, you don't have to go to a restaurant. And it takes a bit of a fight there, I think, to say, yes, being able to go places and do things is part of being in the society.
Well, I will say one thing before I pass the mic off to Em for her thoughts. You made me think of the George Carlin thing, which is because you said everyone understands you have to have access to the law, and my brain went tell that to Japanese Americans in 1942. Because they got sent places without any. They didn't get to see a lawyer. They didn't. All sorts of their rights were just taken away on a whim, which is part of why he said they're not really rights, they're privileges, because they can be taken away that easily. If they can be taken away that easily.
Yeah.
Your point. I think on a social level, I hope that something we can all focus on is coalition building and outreach. So if I'm setting up a Pride event, for example, and I'm having issues getting it done, or I'm running into frustrations with ordinances regarding the number of facilities, perhaps bathrooms, perhaps something else, maybe to really encourage outreach at the intersections with other organizations, whether that's a disability organization, whether that's another cultural group in your sphere of wherever your organization or your event is going to be, to really encourage that and to really to really start thinking about how disrupting hierarchies would really be helpful to everyone. So if it was easier for everyone to access the resources they need, even if it is something relatively small and short term for an event or whatever. A couple of months ago or recently, there was a thread that was reposted to much face palms and eye rolling, where somebody on Twitter was really, really mad and stated that disabled parking just shouldn't exist after 6 o'clock at night. It should only be a thing from 8 to 6, because there's no reason for a disabled person to be out in the world after 6 p.m. So after 6 p.m., dude should just be able to park wherever he wants. And anything short of that is an imposition and unfair. And I think dealing with, that's obviously an extreme reaction to a degree, but to realize that, okay, if we reduce barriers more generally, even if things are not quite as fast as they were for people that they were easy for to begin with, that's an overall net gain, not a net loss. So on the social end, if we could start approaching with a really more outreach-based approach, maybe there can be some way for some level of progress, because legislation is a painfully slow process.
Yeah, I do understand that yes, I think the social outreach, you need to be talking and convincing people that there be a social attitude of your inconvenience is making it possible for others. That it moved from impossible to possible to move yours and make it a bit more inconvenient. Like, that dude's trouble with parking.
Yeah. And yeah,
Well, that does not. I was thinking of something and that just knocked it right out of my head. Wow, my trouble with. They don't need to go anywhere after 6.
I mean, yeah, I mean it's the same sort of. It's the sort of reasoning that people who don't want to see a marginalized group use for anything. I mean, this is used for people who don't. This has probably been used for people who don't want to see black people around. It's probably been used for people who don't want to see indigenous population, people who don't want to see. Yeah.
Part of what I'm saying is a parade, you're going to get a lot of rhythm on the idea of intersectionality and so on. But I think that these things are as
Depends on the Pride
important
Parade.
at the lumberjack jamboree. Okay, that equally, I think that having LGBTQ accessibility, where that is, if that's part of the state's thing, is, you know, whatever with bathrooms, or and people who are physically challenged, or even the neurodivergent, that some planning needs to be done to take them into account and encourage them. And I don't think that's as likely to have rhythm with the planners of those events. They're, I think, less likely to be sympathetic to that idea. And that's where I go. It's simply, you have to start with legislation. Well, actually, you're required to. If you want to have your event, you've got to do this.
Well, yes, but like at the same time, legislation. So like, both the Republican and Democratic Party tend to be very. I mean, the Republican Party oftentimes moves things. Well, currently, some of the members of the Republican Party move things towards fascism, but like a lot of the both the Democratic and Republican Party tends to keep the status quo unless things are fought for, and for things to be fought for, you need to get enough social consensus. Gay marriage wasn't made legal until the majority of the population said it, and if you go legislation, I mean, you should fight for both, but like legislation needs to be popular enough for someone to want to do it, or needs to be shouted about enough for them to have to do it to get reelected. If that makes sense.
I think so. But that's why I'm saying that so I guess you're saying that if we're back to intersectionality, you need to have a strong political movement in order to get anything done in that department, any political done. Which would be the legislation end, that you have to, that I think that you're going to have to legislate these things. I understand the idea of getting it to.
You will, but like to get legislation, the thing that needs to happen.
Yeah, to get
to get legislated is that you need to have enough people talking about and agreeing about, because most legislators are not going to do it out of the kindness of their hearts. There needs to be motivation for the legislator to actually pass it into law.
Yeah. In order for there to be impetus for legislation to occur, there has to be an increase of social capital. And I'm hopeful to at least some degree that in areas of intersectionality like LGBT issues and others, that we're getting to a point where it's like, okay, well, it's an asset if we help each other with greater access here. So we can make it better for everyone if we work together on this. I do agree that at a certain point, it's like, well, I don't care if you want to or not. Guess what? It's the law. Do the thing. I agree with that. I'm somewhat hopeful that in the interim, we can at least in some small ways aim towards working together more, and maybe that'll create ripples of change, which then could lead to legislation. Because at this point, like you said, Ozma, like legislation is not just going to happen out of the kindness of anybody's heart, especially when for both queer people and disabled people, even whose lives do not or situations do not directly intersect, the pathology and the othering is a problem. If you say, oh, well, it's just those disabled people, it's just those queer people, it's not an issue for me, and you're not invested at all, and people don't have any sense of empathy, then stuff is not going to change. And it's not going to change overnight, and it's not going to be easy or simple overnight. I mean, with all the things that are happening with Supreme Court issues that have already been discussed on the show,
Yeah.
that's not just affecting a woman's right to choose, to put it politely, is not only going to affect pregnant people, that's going to affect other people seeking other forms of healthcare. And while the immediate issue is pregnant people seeking support, that's also going to affect access to hormones and other forms of procedures and surgeries that people who are not pregnant still need. So it's a combined effect, and I honestly truly believe we're stronger together than apart. And if we quit sort of, if, at least in small spaces, as much as we can get more towards the idea of collaboration and outreach than fighting for our own personal corners, then maybe eventually we'll get somewhere. And that's my hope.
Yeah, and the risk, and just to add on to that, the risk of just fighting for your own corner is that oftentimes people get complacent and then they stop fighting for the rights of other people, and then their corner gets attacked again, but then they have less support, and it gets harder to reset up support, like and the support groups fall apart, and the communities fall apart, and then legislation falls apart,
As does infrastructure. Like at a certain point, we need infrastructure. You need,
what do you mean by infrastructure?
You need a power grid to deliver power to everybody. You need roads that most people, and even if you're not personally driving, like, the trucks that deliver the stuff you need have to be able to get from place to place. So in areas where it's like, the power grid's unstable and not well maintained, that's a problem for everybody. And that's not a problem that one person on their own can fix. But those are the kinds of issues that we need to be, as much as we can, like, proactive about, and realize that building better infrastructure and stronger supports socially and in the aspects of the physical world where the physical world intersects doesn't just make it better for individuals tomorrow, it makes it better overall.
That's the point of university, but and intersectionality.
Yeah. I don't want to be throwing a wet blanket on it, but I think that moving and trying to get to the legislation is going to be the important thing. But I also recognize that since before I could vote, I mean, back then they were talking about, practical handicap legislation and accessibility. So I'm saying that, the rhetoric has changed. There's been a consciousness level raise in the populace.
It's
but I'm
still
not sure
really low.
we've made the kind of progress that one might have hoped for over the course of that time.
Like the ADA was passed,
yeah.
it did almost nothing for disability rights, and people had to fight tooth and nail just to get that passed. And because of the lack of enforcement, that helps. You have people saying, "Oh, I can't imagine people actually discriminating against disabled people," all the time. I hear, I far too many people say that, that sort of thing, and you have, and there are so many roadblocks to things that there needs to be, like, the ADA got passed partially because of a lot of people. So the documentary Crip Camp goes into a lot of the aspects with regard to it, but a lot of disabled people sort of work together in so someone had a disabled daughter and created like a summer camp for disabled people where disabled people could just be themselves, and everyone, like almost everyone, was disabled, so like you could meet, like, because disabled people tend to be hushed into corners, people got to see a lot more people who had similar things going on in their lives, and they got to communicate, and it made it easier to organize. That place hasn't been around for like 20 years or something, and there isn't like much equivalent, and some of the organizational structures have fallen apart. I think I mentioned this on a thing. Judy Human, one of the people who, someone who I have a clip of in every Rainbow Shelter News episode, with some snark, but like, Judy Human has a YouTube channel with disability rights activists. It has 1,000 subscribers. That's like MLK. Well, not quite like MLK, but it's kind of like Malcolm X or another major civil rights person just being like, "Oh, they're basically a nobody." Like you have a lot of stuff where it's just there isn't the level of visibility, and it's very easy for some marginalized groups immediately drop the support that they get as soon as they succeed in what they're trying to do, and that doesn't help anyone. And
yeah, the ADA didn't do nothing exactly. It did provide some physical guidelines for, and some it did change some of the physical defaults for construction and other aspects of the way things are in the US that did have some positive outcomes. However, like you said, and I went to school in the 80s, and I was one of first what was termed at the time mainstream students, so taken from special education to quote unquote the regular school. And that was predetermined. I got taken to the classroom of second grade teacher by admin. The woman takes one look at me and says to the woman behind me, "I told you I didn't want one of those in my classroom. I told you I didn't want to deal with that." Like the whole time that I was in her class, the only time she said my name was for attendance. I was that. Occasionally, if she felt somewhat charitable, it was you. It was usually that or it. Like the entire time. I was emotionally aware and highly cognizant of the fact that if this woman ever got a hold of me, I probably would be in, to put it lightly, a good deal of physical trouble. Because if she got a hold of me, she wasn't going to stop. Because she didn't think I was fit to be breathing her air. And while that specific strain of distaste has somewhat lessened, one of the frustrations that I have is still, it's like, okay, well, so you got through school, so issues are solved. Oh, the ADA is passed, and I see accessible, I see people in wheelchairs on buses occasionally, or I know that accessible restrooms are a thing. So like your problems are solved, right? It's like, no. And also one of my frustrations, especially from people who I respect in other intersectionalities, and the attitude is still like, oh, well, if you bring up to them, look, the issues are covered, they're important. This is why you might want to consider disability or other access points here. And it's like, I live in a really like old or historic area, and I just don't think of disability because I just don't see people like that around me ever. Right.
Yeah, well,
but you realize, honey, that right there that you're referring to is called segregation. It's called discrimination. It's not, you're not engaging in it maliciously, but it's happening. And it's having physical, literal cost to people around you. And as somebody who is visibly non-conforming in other ways, and your whole thing is, teehee, I just don't see wheelchairs, so teehee, I just don't think of them. That's not okay. And by the way, P.S., the only minority group that you can be like unceremoniously inducted to without your consent or permission at any point is disability. If you get old enough, you're going to be disabled at some point at some level. If you're lucky enough to get old enough, and if you're unlucky enough to be, hit by a vehicle, you're going to be disabled at some level. So there is a level of enlightened self-interest which would behoove you to quit being quite so superior about your currently non-disabled status.
I don't know what you're talking about. What permanent effects? I only drool without any control over that sometimes.
see?
That's
Yeah,
a real thing from the traumatic brain injury, by the way. I do actually uncontrollably drool once in a while, like maybe once a week or something.
That's a thing that will happen. Yeah. the way you put it that, will make it hit home is, you say, if you really think that you can form a plan where you will never be disabled, then you need to draw up a plan for how you plan to die before that happens to you.
And there's an
Because if you keep living, it's going to happen.
Yeah, and there's a whole line of advocacy whose whole chant, among other things, is rather go to jail than die in a nursing home. Because nursing homes in this country are really bad. Special kinds of bad, and not the good kinds of special.
And so many. I was trying to think of I mean, we're well past the hour mark. By the way, I forgot to mention in the pre-record that will show up next week. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy our content at all, and you've for some reason made it this far. But yeah, I think people need to know it, and I think I don't know. I think my brain might be getting foggy. Perfect, say something. You're a co-host.
Ah, yes, okay. I don't know what I should be saying at this point, except that we've had the recent things with the curtailing of rights for women coming up and that sort of thing, and I got some comments on that. On everybody who might make a baby is having their rights curtailed, and they're passing legislation now to be doing that and
is it like 13 states?
This female. Yeah, I think so. Okay.
Or 14 states?
Here's one of the crazy things. There are laws in place in states. Not sure about all
that's
states.
the laws in place, sorry.
The laws that are in place that would lead to the protection if you've decided that you have the right to impose on the mother, the carrier, okay, the pregnant person, then they would not have the right to take that fetus out of your state to a state where it was in any way less protected.
Oh,
in other words, you could say that women could not leave your state until and unless they proved they were not pregnant.
Yeah, that.
Not only that, it's established in law that when you are flying over a state, you are subject to the laws of that state. So, with things like you can't serve alcohol over Iowa, that was a thing, and so on. So when you're flying, so they can have, if you fly over their state, they would then be able to hold you when you landed and make you fly to their state where you would have to prove that you weren't pregnant in order to leave. In other words, they could blockade and separate the country. This is specifically what those laws and the federal laws governing it were designed to be able to prevent. And they said it's not federal job to be legislating those things.
Yep. And again, we're back to medicalizing, pathologizing, eugenics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Eugenics is all roads of ugly lead to eugenics. And I find it really interesting too that a lot of people want to talk about queer history and not talk about the ugly laws. And real quick, the ugly laws basically stated effectively anybody with a sufficiently non-conforming or undesirable appearance just shouldn't appear publicly.
Yeah.
That applied to queer people who didn't pass. That applied to disabled people who were visibly disabled or had speech or other movement patterns that sort of betrayed them, or other sort of social or neurodivergence things which precluded or limited their ability to comply with prevailing social norms. And we could talk all about queer history, but for some reason, we don't talk about that. So surprising, really. And the fact that it all goes back to the same, like, there is theoretically, know it when we see it, an idea of what an idealized fit to reproduce human/American looks like.
Yeah, it's based on white supremacist reasoning, as most awful stuff is, especially stuff in the medical model. But like, yeah, an ideal version of what it means to be a man is a strong, or a strong, fit, fertile person who can have sex or do whatever, spread his seed around until he dies in combat, and women who are nurturing and fertile and able to take care of the inevitable offspring.
Right, and it's ironic that that's the framework, and yet dealing with possible limitations on reproductive health, we're also dealing with a formula shortage for babies, you know, the offspring that they claim to care about so much. And they're talking about placing limitations also on prophylactic access. So IUDs, condoms, Plan B. It's like, okay, so wait, what? You want there to be more babies, but
Well,
you
specifically,
don't
specifically, they want more white babies.
correct. But there are plenty of babies of all different shapes, sizes, colors, and creeds who still require other forms of support, either nutritionally or otherwise, once they're born. There are plenty of people
Well, yeah,
who see
they make sure to distribute those first to white neighborhoods, due to the fact that America is still somewhat segregated. I mean, I know there are certain parts of St. Paul that and Minneapolis that I go to on the regular where, like, you know, I'm like, I'm the only white person I'm aware of within like a couple miles. Like, everyone passing by is not white, and because of a number of factors. But there is probably a reasoning where they only care if white babies survive, and there are aspects of that. Like, there's a lot of white supremacy in conservative thinking. It's really, really bad. And eugenics, racist eugenics, and along with well, eugenics against anyone who doesn't fit their absurd ideal.
Right, which is kind of ironic because you get too much inbreeding, and then you get more genetic instability, and then you get, more genetic problems and less of an ability to reproduce effectively. So, kind of a catch-22 there. Whoops.
But I do think that a lot of the upset is about the ability to produce white babies for adoption.
Yeah. And
I mean,
what, sorry.
I think that any information I have is maybe 2010 at its latest, but I mean, when I look, like 2014 is when I learned some about it, and it was, it's spotty information. One of the things I remember was I could find out that more white families said they didn't care about the race of the baby and were willing to adopt a baby, any baby, than Black families who were looking to adopt. But it wasn't a bigger, it didn't say it was a bigger percentage, it was just more. I was like, that's absolutely useless information. There are more whites than Blacks. So one would expect that to be the case. So it's one of those statistics that's put up there that you go, that doesn't mean anything.
Right. And one of the arguments against.
But one of the things is there are leftover Black babies. There are no leftover white babies.
Well, yes and no. There are leftover white infants, but that requires somebody has the resources, regardless of their ethnicity, to pre-plan to set up the infants for adoption. There are no leftover white. There are very few leftover white babies who do not have some level of medical or other disabling condition. However, there's a moderate amount of white or white passing children in foster care, because there is a prevailing idea that once a child has breached infancy, so over like 6 months, they are less valuable because they are less they're less amenable to being incorporated into a new family. So there are plenty of white kids who need homes. Ironically, a fair number of them are queer. Huh. Funny that.
Are you suggesting that that people are less likely to adopt people who are from marginalized groups?
That could be a factor. But so what I'm saying is that they're looking for mostly to be upping the number.
Yeah, I mean,
I view it as being part of the eugenics program, and I don't feel bad about that, in as much as I've heard the people talking, and some of them are pretty open about it.
Yeah, I mean that comes to the that particular viewpoint involves a lot of a mixture of race realism and the great replacement theory, the theory, or
yes,
that conspiracy theory, and so those two things combined end up oftentimes with eugenics type mentality. Funny that, and I think there's a fascism breakdown on fascism, where it's a lot of people are like, uh, the thing is, very few people are actually willing to do like super cruel things, but a lot of people are fine with it or will do it when ordered.
Or they're willing to do cruel things as long as it doesn't come back to them. So the amount of cruelty that people are willing to engage in behind closed doors, and or when they have a reasonable expectation that it's not going to be traced back to them, is larger than one might think. But to kind of land on a more positive note, I do think if we can get more groups to really focus on intersectionality as an asset and combining resources as a catalyst for community change, I do think there is hope and possibility that things can get better for everyone. And I'm going to remain hopeful that is more viable going forward. And I am still going to keep yelling about the hypocrisy that I see when I see it. So there.
Yeah.
Yeah. On that note, that's a good closing note. Let's just leave it at that. Em, where can people find you?
Here.
Uh-huh.
I think most all the time. On the Discords, random places on the internet, preferably.
Yeah, you have a wrench in a lot of places. And
yeah,
I randomly run into you in a few places. To be fair, oftentimes those are places you recommended to me, so.
It sounds like I have an agenda. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and there are always different things to talk about and other perspectives to consider, and I appreciate sharing mine, and I appreciate all of yours, so thank you.
Perfect. Where can people find you, and is there anything you're working on?
This is the only thing I'm working on, really. There's this and the Fluid Voice Discord and the Rumpus Room. The Rumpus Room is not intended as a safe haven for trans people, but it is intended to be specifically welcoming and protective of the LGBTQ community extended. It's an atheist haven, but that doesn't mean atheists are free to be unchallenged there either. It's a discussion room.
Yeah, atheists aren't allowed to necessarily go all Bill Maher without serious pushback.
Oh yeah, least. That's the point of yes. And the point is that you're not allowed to. And if somebody says, yes, I'm trans, but I don't want to talk about being trans today. Would you like to talk about yada da? That's it. That's done.
Yeah, exactly. And you can find me at Ozma In The Dark on Instagram, Twitch, Twitter. I changed my main Twitter to be Ozma In The Dark. Oh, maybe I don't know if I've updated the YouTube. I might need to update the YouTube description for that. TikTok and Instagram, I'm on the least. Ozma In The Dark on YouTube as well as on Twitch. I'm on Twitch Monday through Wednesday, 4 to 6 p.m. Playing League of Legends and trying not to be too toxic. And by trying not to be too toxic, too toxic for me is very low on the toxic, and I don't use slurs. Like fu is like saying F you to teammate is like the most toxic I think I've gotten thus far, and I don't want to get any more toxic than that, and I try to avoid that even. But yeah, Rainbow Shelter News is live on Twitch on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. I may or may not to have Space Engineers be a thing on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Both of those are on Twitch. Rainbow Shelter News also gets uploaded to this channel. I'm on this channel a lot, and I am on the main on the YouTube channel that I exclusively run. Tomorrow I should be on talking about the mask off moment of a transphobic person arguing for eugenics of trans people. So yeah, back on the topic of eugenics. So I am in a lot of places. I am everywhere doing everything. I even mentioned mastodon.lol, which I forgot to, and I just now remembered. Anyways, so also Ozma In The Dark there. No spaces. But yeah, so with that said, with that long spiel said, your voice matter. Wait, no. Yes, your voice matters, your life matters, and you matter. Right?
Yep.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Peace.